What is up, friends, YouTube motorcycle enthusiasts? Accelerate here with the very, very exciting video that I'm finally releasing. I know I've been talking about it. We're going to talk about hydration, folks, and this is a great time to do it because we're basically in the middle of summer. Most of the AMA Hard Enduro series wrapped up. It was a nice, mostly cool spring. In early summer race season, which was really awesome. And as we come into the heat, everybody's talking about hydration. Hydration gets brought up a lot whenever you start talking about riding dirt bikes from all the different types of terrain, all the different types of temperatures, ambient temperatures, elevations, different people. It just, a lot of people don't really know where to begin, and that's why I wanted to make this video. So I've been studying hydration now for a couple years, and I'm going to give you guys some resources right up front. So before I get into this, I'm going to give you some resources the main resources that I looked at and studied and listened to. So first and foremost, Dr. Andy Galpin. If you guys have never heard of this dude, he is a doctor. He's also a physical trainer and a physical therapist. He mostly got his start working with MMA fighters. But he teaches at university, and he also has his own YouTube channel, which ironically he created to help his students for whenever they didn't catch all the lecture notes or weren't able to be in those lectures. So he just basically has his university course on YouTube, which is really cool, and it continued along with his career. So nonetheless, there's really 3 videos that you guys need to watch. He kind of breaks everything down into 5, 25, and 55 minutes of physiology of whatever topic he's discussing. So there are 3 hydration videos which I will link down below, 125 and 2 55 minutes. The 55s are more about the physiology, but that does get into the nitty-gritty about hydration. I highly encourage listening to those videos, and there's a couple charts and things that I'm going to show you guys throughout the video that I will absolutely give the link also. So I'll show you some charts and some other articles as well as Dr. Galpin's videos. So moving forward, so first we're going to talk about why hydration is important, which is pretty obvious. I won't spend much time on that. Then we're going to talk about the amount of hydration, how much you should be drinking during your period of activity. For us, it's going to be riding or racing dirt bikes. A lot of us, I think I gravitate towards racing just because I think of, if you kind of get a little crampy while you're just riding, it sucks when you're trail riding with your buddies, but it's also not always the end of the world. A race is the last place that you don't want to be performing at your optimum. You're there to do the best you can and have fun and push yourself to the limits. So I always think of like a racing mindset. So, and then also the content. So what should we be drinking, or what should we be putting in the water, or are we just drinking water? So we should know probably that just water is a very bad idea in general. But those are the 3 topics that we're going to talk about. So let's get right into it. So first, why? Again, I won't spend a lot here, but 1 to 5% of dehydration in your body can greatly affect performance, and that's not just with muscular function, but also cognitive. As we know, electrolytes and water in our body, which is essentially in the intracellular fluid, also known as plasma, that is where water is stored throughout our body and organs. This is absolutely critical for muscular function. As we dehydrate, our muscles just do not work the way they're supposed to. So also cognitive function, our brain obviously our brain takes a lot of blood. So for cognitive function, as dehydration occurs, this will affect us also. And the last really big one is heart rate. So A lot of people pride themselves on being able to contain, to have either a low resting heart rate or to be able to maintain a very high heart rate, which really shows a lot of cardiovascular endurance, which, as you guys know, the elite riders in the sport, whether it's hard enduro, moto, or any kind, they're very fit individuals. These guys can race at a blistering pace for long periods of time, and most of them are very well rounded from a fitness perspective. Well, if you're dehydrated, your heart rate will increase, prematurely versus being hydrated. So it will increase your heart rate, and sometimes that can be detrimental. So a high heart rate is not really good. The lower your heart rate for the given of work, per the amount of work, is what we're looking for. So those three things are obviously going to affect us. We all know about dehydration, heat stroke, and all these other things that can occur as the body gets overheated and dehydrated. So next we're going to move into the amount. So everybody has a different strategy on this one, I think. A lot of people, they don't drink water during, they drink some before, drink lots of water 2 days before, all this other stuff. There is hyper and hypohydration. So basically what we're talking about is either being overhydrated or basically maintaining your daily hydration and then going into an event and hydrating during that event. So that is the best outcome. And it doesn't really matter if you're doing training or racing or just daily life. Being hydrated, you will think clearer, you will perform better. So we want to really know what the goal is, right? So the daily hydration, per the Mayo Clinic, is 2/3 ounce per pound of body weight. That is for athletes, which you all are. If you're throwing your leg over a dirt bike and you're going out there pushing yourself on trails, you're an athlete, brother or gal, sister, for sure, right? So what that really means is you just take your body weight and multiply that by 0.66, and you will get what you should be hydrating daily. Which this is kind of a weird number, right? So you're like, oh, well, that's about what I drink. So I'm 190 pounds. If I do that math, it's a little over 120 ounces, right? So that's a little over a gallon a day, or about a gallon a day, which I drink easily. However, if I'm drinking just a gallon a day at 195 pounds or 190 pounds, what if I'm out in extreme weather? What if I'm in 95-degree weather, digging a ditch behind a shed, which is what I just did this last weekend? I assure you I drank more than a gallon as I was doing this throughout the day, just because I'm drinking because I'm sweating so much, and everybody's different, right? So what this comes down to is a chart that I will put up on the screen. And whatever this baseline is, we have to take into account of what our baseline hydration is daily. And then as we apply two things to this chart, an ambient temperature, as temperature increases, you will sweat more, and as work increases. So if you're doing sprints, or AKA, say, riding a dirt bike at race pace, that work output goes up, as well as if ambient temperature goes up, in turn, you need to hydrate more. So we know that that's variable. So really, what does this mean for us? Well, unfortunately, you're never going to be able to fully hydrate during an activity, but you should be hydrating during that activity to help combat dehydration. And what I mean by that is you're never going to be fully hydrated. You're not going to be able to drink back the same amount of water or sweat rather that you lost during the event, but you can help combat it. So the next question is, how much should I be drinking? If I can't get back all my hydration, and I know that I'm supposed to be drinking my 2/3 ounce per pound of body weight going into the event, so to speak, my daily hydration, how much should I be drinking? Well, Dr. Andy Galpin came up with a cheap method of basically tons of the research that has come out, which is essentially 2 millimeters per kilogram per 15 minutes. And the cheap method is you basically take your body weight and divide that by 30, and then you drink that many ounces every 15 minutes. So if I was to take 195 pounds, divide that by 30, that is 6.5 ounces every 15 minutes. So if I multiply that by 4, which is essentially an hour, right? That's 26 ounces of liquid, of fluid, per hour of activity. So to some people that doesn't really seem like a lot, but to some others it seems kind of, that's a good bit. That's a 20. So for reference, for all of you guys that maybe, or gals, use like Hydro Packs or whatever, the Camelbacks or whatever, they're usually in liters, very common. A liter is 33 ounces, so very close to a liter, give or take, right? Per hour, right? So you may be thinking, why so little? I could drink more than that, or whenever I ride, I get more thirsty than that. I can easily drink more than that. Well, the reason why is because there's absolutely some gastric emptying rather. So basically, your stomach can only hold so much fluid as it's transported through your body, right? So if you load the gut with fluid, then you can sometimes have GI distress. So that's one of the things we want to that's one of the things you want to avoid, right? The last thing you want to do during a race is have to stop and use the restroom, okay? AKA a tree, right? Now, trail riding, again, if you're just trying to be hydrated, out training and poking around, then that's a different story. But nonetheless, the key here is to experiment, right? So these numbers, these things are averages. They're not hard set numbers. I've actually found that I can intake a lot more fluid than what that basic number is during a say like a 1 hour race pace session of training. But nonetheless, it does keep me right where I should be, around a liter. Okay, so that's pretty much the amount of what we want to drink. So unfortunately, we got to make decisions, right? If we start talking about a race that's, let's just say, or a long ride with your buddies that's 5 or 6 hours, you're looking at possibly taking 5 to 6 liters of water with you, which is what I did at the last Battle of the Goats race. It's a 6-hour race. I took 5 liters with me, which is basically the most I could carry. That's 3 liters on the back, and with my Zach Speed, absolutely love that pack, by the way. And 2 liters around my waist with the Climb 2-liter bladder. Also really like that pack. So it does add a lot of weight, and depending on my speed. Now the next question, is Tristan Hart carrying 5 liters? Of course not. He's making a lap at probably an hour and 45 minutes, and then easily throwing his fresh camel pack on in the pits and not having those issues, right? But of course, us mortals have to think about it a little bit differently, and that's what we're talking about. So that pretty much covers the amount of water that we should be drinking. Body weight divided by 30 every 15 minutes. But and then you can just play with those numbers left and right. I definitely think that there is everybody's different. That's the main thing, and Dr. Galpin actually talks about that a good bit. Is these are not, again, this is just a place to start. And you always want to test this stuff. Just like you never try a new suspension setting the day of the race or whatever. You never try that new kind of that part or that new gear or whatever the case may be that you've never done before the day of the race. So nonetheless, test it out and see how it goes. So next, it brings me to probably the most controversial part of hydration is the content, which is honestly one of my favorite parts. What I should be drinking. So I think the rule here is that do not drink water, drink sweat, because we're not losing water when we work. we're losing sweat. And what the body is looking for is replenishment of hydration. Human hydration is not just water, it is obviously sweat. So, what is lost during sweat? So, the answer really is electrolytes and water. So, the piece of this that a lot of people miss is what is electrolytes? Well, electrolytes are essentially sodium, chloride, potassium, magnesium, and glucose. And that glucose, which is essentially sugar or energy, which is burned during the sweating process. So all those things put together equate the sweat that we sweat out of our bodies. So that's really what we need to be putting back into our bodies. You know, and some people will say that that's not necessary, and I think it really kind of depends. You know, I've talked to people that only ever drank water and never really have a problem. And I think there's like a lot of topics. It's a very dynamic reasoning. And I'll speak on that for just a second, because, you know, sodium is king, really, of the electrolytes. You know, sodium is number one, and about at 1/4 or a 1 to 4 is potassium, and then a little bit of magnesium, and then the glucose portion, which is just a little bit of sugar, which is a different topic I'll speak on briefly as well. So I think, you know, what a lot of people kind of maybe miss is that the sodium we get in our food, if you have a high sodium diet anyway, and you go into a 2 or 3 hour ride, but you've been eating relatively high sodium or processed foods, which is common in our diets often, then you probably have enough sodium in your body to be fine to drink water, and it doesn't really, you know, come down. You don't really have those issues. But I assure you, if you kept, like, for example, a 6-hour race, I use that as the example a good bit, because 6 hours is a long time, and any kind of calories that you deplete from your muscle, or sodium or sweat that you deplete from your body, it needs to be replenished. Your performance will drop off. And I think that's really where we kind of start to see the reality, the truth of the science and the physiology come through. So I'm not saying it always makes a difference 100%, but in the end, if you look at what the pros are doing and what people that are taking hydration seriously for their performance are doing, they're absolutely putting these components back in their body. All right. So the fluid must be the same concentration as the intracellular fluid, aka plasma, or what happens if it's too dilute, then you'll pee it out. If it's too concentrate, then you'll have that GI distress problem again. If you're onboarding too much sodium into your gut, the same thing happens with drinking too much water, is the sodium pulls the water from your body into your gut. And it's the same thing happens as if we were drinking a bunch of water, then we can have GI distress, which again, we don't necessarily want, right? So we play this balance game. So the next question is really, if I know that I need to have sodium, I need to have potassium, I need to have a little bit of magnesium, and I ultimately need to be replenishing some glucose in my body, what does that look like? Where do I start? So the average athlete, these are great numbers, by the way. The average athlete is 500 to 2,000 milligrams of sodium per hour of activity. So that's like, wait, what? So I can either drink, you know, I can have 500 milligrams or 2 grams. Like, it's a huge swing. And the reality is that physiology amongst humans is very, very different. But if you look at what most people will say through the studies, is they start at around 1,000 milligrams of sodium per hour of activity. So if you were to average it with what you're losing or what you should be drinking, if it comes back to our amount topic, remember I was saying about 1 liter, which is your body weight divided by 30 every 15 minutes, give or take, you know, maybe 10 to 15%. I landed on around about 1 liter an hour is what I shoot for. Then I'm looking at about 1,000 milligrams of sodium, and then it's a 1 to 4 on the potassium, and then about a 1 to 4 or 1 to 5 on the magnesium, a little bit of magnesium, and that's mostly it. That's sodium, potassium, and magnesium. So for example, if you had 1,000 milligrams, you'd be looking at around 250 milligrams of potassium and around 150 to 200 milligrams of magnesium. So that's pretty much what we should be drinking from an electrolyte replenishment perspective. So I guess the real question is, how do you know? Well, we know based on a lot of different symptoms of what dehydration looks like. So the lack of electrolytes causes the same problem as dehydration. Your body's looking for something that they call a homeostasis, right? Like I was saying before, we drink back our sweat. So if the mixture is too dilute or not dilute enough, then we're going to have symptoms. A lot of symptoms that people complain about, for example, is cramps. I cramp, and the muscle can cramp for other reasons, muscular fatigue. I remember watching a Zack Attack video recently, and he was talking about having cramps, not from being dehydrated because he wasn't sweating that much, but it was actually a muscular issue from just not being trained early in the season, which totally makes sense. But if you're constantly having cramping issues in an environment where you're sweating a lot, I think that's kind of the dead giveaway that you need to be taking in more electrolytes. So obviously there is a huge gambit of different products out there that you can use, and frankly, you can make your own electrolyte mix, which is kind of one of the things that I've gravitated towards a particular brand, but I modify that brand because there's still not enough sodium. So I'll speak briefly on this for a second before I talk about glucose, because this kind of goes together. So of all the different manufacturers out there, there's obviously electrolyte mixes. You guys really need to be looking at, everybody gets on the bandwagon of, the advertising and the marketing gets really good, eliminates arm pump, performance, professional hydration, all this different stuff, right? The science proves superior, right? What are you losing? What's in it, and what should you be shooting for, right? So a lot of people talk about Gatorade. A lot of people talk about all the different types of, there's Hammer Nutrition. I mean, there's so many different types of mixes and stuff. So at the end of the day, the electrolyte mix needs to be close to what you're losing. So start with the average, the 1,000, the 250, and the 50 to 200 of magnesium, and go from there. Do tests, run it. So one of the things you can do is, if you want to skip all the testing, is you can do something called a sweat test. So the sweat test is basically going to be, you wear a patch, you essentially wear a patch, and that patch will be sent off to a lab. And it sounds expensive, but it's not. It's relatively inexpensive. And you just have to know your sweat rate. And your sweat rate's pretty easy to figure out. All you do is you go ride at race pace for an hour. You weigh yourself naked right before that. You get a weight. You gear up completely. You can hydrate during that time. You ride at an ambient temperature at your pace, whatever that pace is. We choose race pace because, again, geared towards racing, right? And then you subtract the weight of the fluid that you drank during that time. As soon as you're done riding, you gear down and you weigh yourself naked again. So, 1 liter of water is 2.2 pounds. And then based on how much weight you lost and how much weight you gained through drinking the from your pack, then essentially what your sweat rate is. So I've done one so far. I'm due for another one because, what did I say before, right? Ambient temperature. So I did one at 70 degrees ambient temperature. I need to do another one at 90 degrees and at 50 degrees. And what that will do, that will build a chart for myself. So the one I did at 70 degrees, I was sweating 1.2 liters per hour at race pace. Now this will vary a little bit, as you guys know, because you guys have been doing your clutch drills and you've been doing, all your different, we're getting better, right? So ideally, as your body adapts and you're working, your skills get better, you work a little less harder, so you do this test periodically. Nonetheless, what doesn't change is what your body is sweating out. I know that if I sweat 1.2 liters per that session, based on my tests, and I'm wearing my patch, when I send my patch off to the lab, they send it back to me and say, Accelerate, you have sweat 1,250 milligrams of sodium, 180 milligrams of potassium, and 200 milligrams of magnesium. Like, they know what's in it. They can calculate based on the lab readout. So bada bing, bada boom. I literally just got the exact content that I need to put back in my body. And this is exactly what Olympic athletes, ultramarathon runners, and I would venture to say your top hard enduro riders, I'd venture to say they do it too. They know, guys. This is like across the board amongst endurance and performance athletes, they do this, right? Any sport where you hydrate throughout and it's like endurance based, they're rehydrating with their exact formula. And again, MMA fighters, guess what they're doing? They're rehydrating their body weight back to their exact physiology. So the last piece of that is glucose, and I said I would talk about this whenever I was talking about different brands. So a lot of people forget or think about what they need to add into their pack or they need to eat. So for about 1 hour of activity, we should be consuming around 300 calories. No matter the top athlete in the world, no matter how trained you are, after about an hour to an hour and a half of activity, you're going to do what runners call as bonk. You're going to use all of the glycogen that's stored within your muscles, and you're just going to fatigue instantly. Like, this happens to the best of the best. This is why they have to consume calories, right? And the higher your heart rate is, aka pinging, trying to get up that rock garden step up, in a race, the higher your heart rate is, the more sugar you burn. So if you look at these hydration mixes, they're going to have sugar in it as well. So you should be shooting for around 20 to 40 grams of sugar per liter as well, and again per hour if that's around where you're landing. So 300 calories or 20 to 40 grams. There is some difference between complex and simple carbohydrates. I've talked about that before. I'm not going to get into it here because fueling is a little different than hydration, but we have to include it because we're talking about Gatorade, different types of mixes that we would be buying. So what's the answer? Well, there is no perfect answer. There are companies that take that sweat test, the patch that you sent in, and they will absolutely formulate a perfect hydration mix for you. That does get a little bit more expensive. What I find is the best thing to do is find a company that makes close to what you're looking for, and then you can modify it. If you want to add more sugar, then you can add more cane sugar, honey, fructose. You can buy dextrose. You can buy all these things in their clean format. If you find that there's not enough sodium, you can add sea salt or pure sodium with just a little measuring spoon. And then you can kind of fine tune what your hydration should look like. All right, guys, that pretty much wraps it up. Everything we talked about, all the way from why we hydrate to how much we should be hydrating and what we should be hydrating with. This all really comes back to, at the end of the day, how serious are you? Do you want to perform at the best you can be at the top level? I'm never going to be a top rider that, gets paid or does anything super cool. This is just a big hobby for me, but I have fun doing it, and I like to push myself and challenge myself. And one thing is for sure, I don't want to be bent over my bike, cramped up, dehydrated whenever I should be out there fighting for another position of hard enduro glory in Accelerate's world of awesome. Alright guys, that wraps up the hydration video. If you guys got any questions at all, please put them down below. I hope you got something out of this video. I know my fitness series isn't like mind-boggling or is not breaking any records or anything, but I enjoy these videos and I enjoy making them in this fitness journey, and hydration is a huge part of that. So stay salty, friends. Get out there, get on two wheels, and ride a dirt bike. This is Accelerate once again, signing off.